Hi, me again. In this video blog I'm going to talk about 3 books to read just because they're really, really good, but also to tide you over until A Dance with Dragons by George R. R. Martin comes out, if you are one of the people that's been waiting for it for a long time. And I've got 3 which I'm going to talk about. One which I think would immediately appeal to any fans of A Song of Ice and Fire, or to any fantasy fans in general, actually. Another one which should also appeal to fans of A Song of Ice and Fire, but is a bit different, but would certainly appeal to all fantasy lovers. And one which is totally different, but I think is one of the best new fantasy series I've read any time recently. So to start off with, we'll talk about this, which is Daughter of the Empire by Raymond E. Feist and Yanni Wirtz. And this is the first book of a trilogy about a young lady on a world called Kellowan who suddenly becomes head of her house in this empire formed of great houses, and has to establish her house and almost rescue her house from the position it's found itself in. And there's a lot of politics. There's some traditional fantasy staples like fighting, there's a few romances. There's some strange creatures, but mainly it's a story about human intrigue, and it's fascinating. It's exceptionally well written. I think it's an absolutely gripping read. And once it was almost assumed that all fantasy heroes had to be men, well, Mara of the Akoma is very much a woman. She's a very young woman as well. Fans of A Song of Ice and Fire could perhaps recognise some of Daenerys in her. Fans of James Clemens would certainly a little bit of Elena's strength in her, but she's an excellent character and she's very well written, and there are a lot of very, very good things in this book. Having said that, it was set up by this book, which is Raymond E. Feist's Magician, and if you haven't read Magician, I would strongly recommend you do so, because I rate this pretty much the best standalone fantasy novel ever written. I don't think it's quite as good as A Song of Ice and Fire, but I think that this book actually should be credited as being better than Lord of the Rings by everyone. I think it's outstanding, and it's standalone. It's not part of a trilogy or a long saga. Page 1 is the beginning, and the last page is the end. There's no... you don't need to go on and find out what happens afterwards. There are subsequent books set with the same characters and in the same world, but you don't need to read them. There's no cliffhanger. You know what happens at the end, and it's just whether you choose to go on. So I'd recommend that as well before you read Daughter of the Empire, because both are very, very good indeed. Next we've got this, which is the late great David Gamel's Lion of Macedon. This is set in ancient Greece, set in Sparta, so all fans of 300 will find this a good one. And it's based around a young man called Parmenion, who is a very unpopular boy within his barracks, his training barracks. He's 15 at the start. He grows up fairly quickly, and it's a story of his travels within Greece, and his involvement in the political intrigues that go on, and also his role in the various wars and battles that take place. And he's a He's an absolutely fascinating character. David Gemmell's written an awful lot of books, and he's predominantly a heroic fantasist rather than an epic fantasist such as Feist or Eddings or George R.R. Martin. And he very much focuses on the characters being at the forefront and their deeds being the most important thing. That's not to say the plot's simplistic, because it isn't. But Parmenion is very much the focus. And in my opinion, he is the best character in fantasy. I've not read anything to convince me otherwise. He's even better than Tyrion Lannister. He's even better than Belgarath the Sorcerer, or Magnus the Black, or even Mara of the Acoma. He's a very three-dimensional character. He's an interesting person who's got an interesting life. And this is one of the absolute best books I've ever read, so I would recommend absolutely everyone to go out and read this, and when you finish it, read its sequel, Dark Prince, which covers what happens after. Quick note, the period of Greek history, if you know anything about it, is shortly before the rise of Macedonia, so it's set as the interminable Peloponnesian conflicts are grinding to a halt and other cities beginning to rise to prominence. And finally, we've got this, which is Witchfire by James Clemens. Note there's a little apostrophe between the T and the C. Don't be put off by that at all. James Clemens is also known as James Rollins. His real name is Jim Tchaikovsky. And this is a story, again a bit female lead. It's about a young girl who lives in a world where the lands have been taken over by a foreign presence. And this being fantasy, this foreign presence is not very nice. They're not good guys. And I can't say very much more about the plot, because the revelations start fairly early on. This is part of a series called The Banned and the Banished. It's a 5-book series which is complete, so if any of you are worried about it not being finished or not being finished yet, don't be. It's fairly recent, and there's a noticeable difference in style to what had become popular at one stage, in that this is not a long, rambling discourse. The books aren't particularly long, but they don't need to be, because they're incredibly intense. The different strands of the plot are woven together very well. James Clemens does that very clever thing of stopping the plot at various points and going and looking at another bit of it. And he's paced it as such that he does it at the precise moment where your tension is at the absolute highest, and then he plunges you into another plot where the tension is also at the absolute highest. So you're nevertheless wanting to skip the next chapter, because you're still waiting for the conclusion to the previous strand of the plot. And he manages to sustain this over such a long time. And at times it's slightly exhausting, and I remember at one point I was reading it one afternoon, and I had to force myself to put the book down and take a break, because I was so caught up in it. It was such an intense experience. I just had to have a break, had to have a glass of water, and had to go to the bathroom, because I was so locked into it and so tense from this this incredibly fast-paced plot that I needed to take a break. Although it's fast-paced, it doesn't lack detail, it doesn't lack intricacy. It's hard to categorise the writing, because it's somewhere between epic and heroic, because it's certainly a fairly epic journey, but it doesn't have the kind of deep intricacy of world. It's not to say it's not well visualised or realised, fairly complete places created, but it's not it's not about the events of a living, breathing world. It's much more heroic tale. It's about the main character, Elena Morgenstern, and her companions, who are more interesting than many posses that turn up in fantasy, both today and throughout the course of the literary genre. And that's Witchfire and the Banned and the Banished. Don't be put off by the strange apostrophes in places. They are perhaps a little pretentious, but I can forgive James Clemens that, because I think they're very, very good. So thank you for watching, and keep an eye out for my next Song of Ice and Fire blog.